Rick and Morty is a series that's been through a lot behind the scenes. That's something that really hasn't been a secret. In fact, it's been right out in the open, and there have been countless YouTube videos about how hectic basically everything with the show has been. And with how absolutely invasive the show's popularity once was, it might actually come as a surprise to at least some of you that not only are we on season 8 of the series, but that we just had the season 8 finale. And honestly, it's probably the best episode of Rick and Morty that I've seen in quite some time. I know that hearing someone say something like, best episode in a while, might seem like overly high praise depending on the last time you really checked in on the show. It's easy to look at the series and think, man, this show really fell off. Between all of the Justin Roiland stuff, the series taking years between seasons early on, and interest just naturally waning as a series continues on and matures, it really wouldn't surprise me that a good chunk of the show's audience would clock out. After around season 3 or so, it's easy to look at the series and think that it just kind of started smelling its own farts a bit too much. It got too in its own head. The show started to get a bit too serialized. It tried too hard to get to the emotional gut punches that worked so well in the beginning of the series, but have since grown stale and semi-predictable. And don't get me started on all the really weird writers barely disguised fetish moments. We've all heard these arguments, and we've probably said half of them ourselves. But I really do have to say that season 8's finale genuinely surprised me with its honesty. This felt like more than a simple return to form. It felt like a genuine reminder of what the series actually could be, what it maybe should have always been. A show that manages to balance absurdism with real, painful human experience. And maybe, most importantly, it gave us something that we rarely actually get to see from Rick and Morty: closure. And not against some other evil version of Rick or a face-off with all of the villains of his past, but instead by looking inward. Literally, it forces Rick to confront his grief. Not with fists, not with science, not even with alcohol, just with memory. Let's start with the episode's plot. We actually have a bit of a callback here. A while back, Rick basically stitched Bird Person's memories back together and retrieved the current Bird Person from said memory. But while there, apparently a younger version of Rick gains sentience. He initially begins infecting Jerry's memories, but is quickly dispatched and put into this weird memory bank storage area. Dream Rick then makes his way into Beth's memories and begins to infect Beth's memories in an attempt to save Diane, Rick's dead wife, and Beth's mother's memory from Rick. You see, in an attempt to grow and be more emotionally available for Bug Ann, Rick removed Diane from his memory. Wait, I just got the joke. Her name is Bug Ann because she's a bug, and her name is Diane because she's dead. Anyways, this intrusion and shaping of Beth's memories has terrible effects on her and starts to drive her mad. Rick and Space Beth eventually manage to subdue Beth, and they extract the added memory in Memory Rick and Memory Diane. And what comes next is probably the biggest surprise of the episode in my mind. Instead of doing what we would expect Rick to do in the situation, destroying them or imprisoning them, he instead decides to let them be together. He launches their memory pod into space, allowing them to be forever young, in love, disconnected from the pain of their real selves. It's a very powerful end to the season, and one of the most interesting plots I think I've ever actually seen from sci-fi as a whole, let alone Rick and Morty. While normally they kind of lift their highbrow sci-fi ideas from other properties, this is a fairly unique plot idea. Yes, there are clear references to other media, specifically Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and Inception, but the idea of a memory somehow becoming sentient and influencing someone else by messing with their memories is a really, really cool concept, honestly. In the ending portion of the episode, where we see Memory Rick and Memory Diane realizing that everything happening has already happened because they're in memories and not experiencing things as they're happening, is a brilliant concept. Despite this absolutely killer concept for an episode, this one isn't really about the science, it's about grief. It's about what happens when you lock away something from yourself for a long time. Rick had Diane's memory locked away. We know that he was off fighting to get revenge, but we're past that now. And Rick's keeping of this memory locked away ends up having the biggest effect on the only other person who would have memories of Diane, his daughter. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I think this is all a great metaphor for how refusal to acknowledge and confront grief has lasting effects, not just on yourself, but on those you care most about too. Ultimately, in this episode, Rick isn't fighting some villain that he can simply overcome. He's fighting himself, and not like a clone version of himself or anything, but he's facing himself in the most literal sense. It's a memory of him. He has to confront his own pain and his own grief before it can consume and destroy his daughter. And finally, in the end of the episode, we see a Rick who isn't looking to delete a version of himself for maybe the first time in the series. He's ready to let this past version of himself go, to move on. Let's talk a bit about a few things that jumped out to me. As we've already said, this episode focuses heavily on both Beth and Rick. And while we briefly have Rick off doing his own thing on Bug-An's planet, this episode doesn't have a huge multiversal threat or chase across different realities. We eventually have Rick and Space Beth following regular Beth as her mind breaks down and she's driving erratically in her car. And somehow this feels like a more climactic finale than some of the others with huge explosions and showdowns, because this feels a million times more personal. It's just a father and daughter both dealing with the unprocessed trauma, and this is where it leads them. The ending part, where we find out that Rick has decided to let this memory of himself and his memory of Diane go, also feels almost anticlimactic in the best way. It's just Rick staring off into the emptiness of space as he realizes that he's being fully ghosted by Bug-An, even if he does kind of deserve that. The direction here, and I really want to make sure I'm calling out how great the direction is in this scene, is fantastic. We get to watch the pod drift off in what is maybe the most poetic shot I've ever seen from the series. Rick is letting go. For the first time ever, really. He's gotten his revenge, he's living happily with his family, but he can no longer let himself be fully shackled down by the memory of who he and Diane were at one point. And repressing this down has done nothing good for him. He's finally ready to live again. This is maybe the most mature I've seen the show be for a long time. And we don't need the overly preachy therapy talk coming at us. Just an emotionally resonant story. That's another part of what makes this episode work so well in my mind. They aren't spelling everything out for us. They let the emotion speak for itself. The episode trusts the audience. It trusts us to sit with the discomfort. And it trusts us to remember who Rick was so that we can fully see where he's come. I didn't expect to care this much for the Rick and Morty season finale, but this episode really hit me like a truck. I'm not getting too deep into my personal life. I'm my own person and you aren't entitled to know everything about me. But I've experienced loss in my life, some losses more recent than others. But everyone's lost someone. Everyone has felt that tremendous grief. Hot Rick reminded me why I got into the show in the first place. The wubba lubba dub dubs are funny, but it's these expressly human moments where I think the show really comes alive. It's not the portal guns, the huge fights, the pickle Ricks. It's these small moments where the show lets you sit with emotion. Rick didn't win this time, not really. He couldn't or didn't want to outsmart his grief. He didn't find a violent or terrifying end to these memories that caused him and his family pain. He just, for the first time, let it go. Rick, for the first time in a long time, finally feels human again. I don't know where Rick and Morty goes from here, but I'm really excited to see where they end up in the next season. But anyways, this has been 10K Bill, and thanks for watching. Like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below what you'd like to hear me talk about next, and of course, make sure you subscribe for all your entertainment-related content.